here you are, beginner beekeepers, you think that spring is the time where it really starts, right? Well, for you, yes, because you're getting packages in April. But really, fall is an incredibly important time for beekeeping. Because you're in that shoulder period of time where you've harvested honey and you want to make sure that you have enough food for them so they last over the winter. And I can't emphasize that enough. Giving them the food, making sure you don't take it off, don't be greedy. Sure thing to kill your colonies by starving them over the winter time. That's why fall management is important. Let's see, what does it say here? Now's the time to consolidate your colonies. So you're going to be taking those honey supers off, right? You're going to be harvesting. You're going to be medicating if you need to. We'll talk a little bit about that. So for me, I'm all in Western, all right? And so I try to keep around my colonies in about 3 Westerns for the brood boxes, and then stack supers during the summertime. And you saw that silly number of like 7 or 8 Westerns. Oh my God. Who does that? Well, I can tell you who does that. It's folks in Spokane County who've got awesome nectar flows and people who are not on the dry side of the Olympics. So those numbers are for wetter areas that actually have really heavy nectar flows. And you can take advantage of that by stacking super stuff. Man, when we moved over here, what a shocker to come from where we would put 5 Westerns on top of our brood boxes to 3 max on this side. And it's just because it's drier. We really are in a bit of a rain shadow with the Olympics. You get a little south, right? Get south of Port Orchard, and then your rain and your moisture increases. But I'm in Kingston. I'm just glad I'm not squid. All right, fall management, right? So here you go. You've peaked your honey flows. You've harvested. Well, what do you do, man? You just sit back and have some cigarette? Actually, there's a lot of work to do. All right, store your supers. You're going to harvest your honey supers. I do not recommend that you store full honey supers and wait. My recommendation is that you harvest your honey when you take it off. Right? It's best to store honey in an inner container, like a 5-gallon bucket or jars. That's the best place for your honey. All right, so one of the things that you're going to want to do is make sure that you're in 2 deeps or 3 Westerns by the end of the season. And you're going to want to make sure that it's heavy. Now, like you said, 60 pounds of honey, right? That's about an equivalent of a Western. Okay? And so when you're in deeps, think about how many frames you need of honey, and they'll have their brood colony in the middle, and then all the honey's on the side. And they'll create an arch on the top. And a good, easy check is just to lift the hive. And I don't mean physically lift it, I mean tipping it. So to take the back, squat down, grab it, and lift it up. And if you're going, oh God, this thing's heavy, more than likely, you're golden. Don't even need to get here. They say to store combs with paradichlorobenzene crystals. Ooh, another chemical. Damn. Those are moth crystals. If you're going to store comb using this method, do not use naphthalene, right? Naphtha. That is moth balls. Okay? That embeds itself in the wax and is a poison. Whereas paradichlorobenzene doesn't embed itself in the wax, and it evaporates after a while. It will not poison the bee. So if you use that method, fine. A lot of people will just stack their hives with a sheet of newspaper in between each one to limit any damage from wax moths. And your sweet period with wax moths is the fall, because just like hornets and other stuff, they're all laying eggs, they're all trying to survive over the winter. And while it's still warm, while it's still in the 60s and 50s, is that time when the wax moths are still active and get into your boxes. By the time winter comes, they're dormant, just like all the other insects. They're slow. They're not going to do much. So if you don't use nasty chemicals, stack them nice and neat, keep them off the ground, and then put a sheet of paper in between them.
So they stay dormant in your hive? So they'll be
Wax moths?
spring.
Yeah, so that's just the thing with wax moths is that they're always going to be around to one extent or another, one or two or whatever. The main thing is when you're stacking them up, exclude them, right? Make sure that the boxes are stacked nice and neat, that there's no leakers, And so if you have hive tool damage on the corners, things like that, use a piece of duct tape, right? Tape is an amazing tool, right? So I shouldn't have to say this, but when you remove the honey supers, you also remove the queen excluders, all right? I see it as a very common mistake where people will leave that queen excluder on the top and they'll put the inner cover on the top. But take it off. Store it away, scrape off any excess wax, and just store it for the winter. Now, as a beginner, you probably aren't going to have weak colonies, because you're not going to have 5 or 6 colonies. But now, second year you will, because you'll learn beekeeping is so much fun that you just can't do without it. Now, I've always recommended that a beginner start with 2 colonies, because they are very different super organisms. And so if you have 2 colonies and one is weaker, right? Let's say that it's only like a box and a half, and they really aren't laying much, but the other colony is doing great, unite it. Don't try to make it survive over the winter, probably won't. It's either mites or the queen wasn't properly mated, or some other issue that's going on. It's much better to have a large, strong colony, one, going into the winter, than it is to have a good colony and then kind of a weak colony. The small colony is most likely just going to die anyway, especially as a beginner. And until you start to learn those nuances of insect culture and management and the ways to manipulate smaller colonies so that you can get them through the winter, there's a lot of special techniques that can get you there. But it really does take time for you to come to these events of ours, right? And to learn from the other people what they've been doing and to get into other people's hives. Learn that. Feed colonies. So let's see. So if you do have colonies that are a little light, right? Let's say that you either got a little greedy and you took off too much honey, or you took off, let's say you had a box of honey, and you're like, all right, fine, they'll make it up. Well, what if we have a dry September into October? What if we don't have any of these partial nectar flows going into the fall? You better make it up for them. Right? So that's why if your colonies are a little light, you've got to feed them. Go ahead.
So if you feed them, they'll go for that before they break into their stored honey supply?
Yeah, so there is a, well, the answer is yes and no. Will they go into their stores versus eating the sugar water that you're going to give them?
Testing.
Boy. Fine.
It'll wake everybody up.
Hear me now? What are they, break dancing or something up there? All right, what was the question again? It was about feed.
Turn it back up a little bit, or move your mic up a little bit. Too low.
Feed them in the winter if there's not enough honey.
Yeah, feed them in the winter. All right, so they will take your sugar, all right, over any capped honey, unless there's such a dearth that they need it. And if there is actually nectar flow out there, more than likely they won't take the sugar water that you're giving them because they want the nectar over your sugar water. On the other hand, if your hive is light, feed, because more than likely they're going to need that extra capped sugar water, even though it's not nectar.
But in the winter, it's dry sugar or fondant, right?
Yeah, and so if you do emergency feeding in the wintertime, then our recommendation is to use dry sugar or cook up fondant. And we can show you some of those techniques. If you continue to come to our meetings and stuff, you'll learn more. Let's see here. So requeen. Actually, this is when I requeen. I requeen in late summer or fall. So after honey's off, and most of my queens I try to do every other year. Sometimes I have monster queens that go into the third year, but rarely do they last much longer than that. So I always plan on buying queens or making my own. And remember, we have a queenery class. This is my time to plug SFBs. Requeening, this is a good time of year. A lot of people will do requeening in the spring, but I don't recommend it. I think you guys have heard in some of the earlier classes where you have competition. It's the time when all the queen producers and the packaged bee folks are working to get packaged bees done, and all of those extra queens are going to the commercial producers. And so you're competing with a very large group of people. If you buy queens later in the year, you have a much better chance of getting what you want and getting a good mated queen. Anyway, that's what I do. And it's pretty easy, especially like if there's a nectar dearth in the summer. What you'll do is if you're going to introduce queens, you feed all the colonies in the apiary, not just the one that you're going to requeen. But we can get into those details another time.
So you're saying you want to requeen while there's still a nectar flow?
It's best to requeen during a nectar flow. Yeah, they always accept changes in a colony more readily when there's food coming in. But if there isn't the nectar flow, create one yourself by feeding. Yes, go ahead.
So, queens are available from someone like Stedman's or Stedman's from April to...
Yeah, actually, queens are available all the way through spring through fall, from either from California, the Carolinas, Hawaii. Actually, I really enjoyed Kona queens. Not that I'm plugging any particular folks, but their carniolans are awesome.
What happens to the old queen? Do we take the old queen out?
What do you do with the old queen? All right, so many of us run nukes, nucleus colonies, right? 4 to 5 frames. So what I do is all of my old queens go into nukes, and then sometimes I'll overwinter nukes, just depends on what my goals are. But let's say, for instance, that queen that I bought didn't take, right? I'm stuck. What I can do is I can take that queen that I banked in my nuke and I can put her right back in. Okay. Or you can just pinch the queen, throw her on the bottom, and put a new queen in.
Other question is, let's say I'm ordering the Italian bees, and you're saying that these other queens that are different type, can they go with, can you buy a queen that's not the same?
Yeah. So she's saying, I'm doing Italians, I want to buy a carniolan queen. Yeah, you can kill it. You can kill the old queen and put a carniolan in. It should be accepted. And we can teach you different ways of queen acceptance. I'm not going to get into that in this class, because we could spend another hour talking about queen acceptance. And don't try to overwinter weak colonies, or especially if if you have a colony with any kind of disease in it, especially brood diseases like American foul brood, those things will just stick around. And frankly, the colony is just not going to survive the winter. And the other thing too is if you didn't actually treat for varroa mites, the likelihood of your colony surviving into the spring is much less. And this is an opportune time during fall management to also treat for varroa mites, because now you'll have your honey supers on, right? Okay, food quality, right? So we talked about feeding. Well, the best food for the colonies really is honey. And so by taking your supers off early enough, providing time for them to go gather their own food is the best source of food, right? All I'm telling you is that if your hives are light as you get into the fall, don't ignore it. Okay? The highest quality food is their own honey. Don't feed them fruit juices or any of that kind of stuff. Or like folks are doing ciders and that kind of stuff. And so if you are processing ciders and that kind of stuff in the fall, make sure that you protect your area so the bees don't get into it and start feeding off those fruit juices. There's nothing like dysentery in a hive in the fall. Poop is everywhere. It's really gross. Well, they don't go into the winter very well either. I mean, nobody likes to go to bed with diarrhea. So feeding them with 2 parts sugar, 1 part water. It says here never after September 15th, but I think it's a judgment call. Here's how I think about it, is that you're feeding them liquid sugar water, and they have to evaporate it enough where it will not ferment, right? So if you are continuing to feed, let's say that it starts raining, right? Well, feeding them sugar water probably isn't going to do much for them anymore. And usually, like October, right, is when it just starts raining continuously or drizzling, or the temperatures drop, and then liquid feeds become less effective. Provide them with a little ventilation. They appreciate it, especially if you fed your colonies, because they're going to continue to try to evaporate that sugar water for as long as they can before they have to cluster. As the temperatures drop into the 50s, the hive is going to start becoming a more dense colony. They're going to move up. And so there's less opportunities for them to evaporate the sugar. And water will condense in the colony. And you definitely don't want it to condense and drip on them. So some things that you can do is, like if you use solid bottom boards, tip the colony up a little bit in the back. So that way, when it rains or if there's really a lot of condensation, it'll dribble on down to the bottom board and then out the colony. It also means that it'll be easier for you to wipe out dead bees on the bottom board in the middle of winter, which is wintertime activity. Some people also create a top entrance by just propping up the lid over the inner cover just a little bit. It doesn't take much. Some people use a popsicle stick, some people use a rock. Anyway, just provide a little cross ventilation here.
You had a question back there.
Yeah.
Have you ever made a shelter for them, like for the winter? I know it has to,
Yeah, I've never made a shelter. I have not. And in the Northwest, you don't have to wrap your hives like you do in Minnesota. We're in such a mild climate that you really don't have to do much. What I would recommend is that you site your colonies in a nice location where you don't have trees dripping on them during the wintertime, that they're in the open. If they're in a really windy area, instead of providing that top ventilation, you're going to want to have your lid down tight on the top, and maybe even a brick on the top too.
You mentioned like wrapping the hive in a cold climate like Minnesota.
Yeah, I did.
I read in the handbook that we got that they can get the dysentery stuff from being in the hive for, I think it was more than 10 weeks.
Mhm.
Suppose your cold weather lasts more than that, what do you do?
Yeah, okay, so there is no hard and fast rule, 10 weeks, all right?
Okay.
Now, the honeybee is capable of, during the overwintering period, of, you know, slowly eating their stores, right? But also, they have the ability to expand their colon and basically store up their feces for an extended period of time. And then,
It's natural.
don't you and I wish we could do that? Anyway. They do take cleansing flights. So they do take the opportunities to go out and take cleansing flights, and then they go all over. Now, the interesting thing, though, is that they can actually survive those hard Minnesota winters very well. They cluster very tightly in the cold. Whereas, like this mild winter, actually, they went through the honey stores like you wouldn't believe because it was so warm, they didn't need to cluster tightly, and the bees were actually fairly active. And we actually had a lot of bees out during flights in the middle of the winter, all winter long. Anyway, this is, remember dysentery? No, you know, keep them clean. So we talked about positioning the colonies. Definitely, if you can keep them out of a windy area, do. Now, there's a lot of areas, like, there's a lot of beekeepers on the plateau of Port Townsend. Man, it's always windy up there. They've done things like stack pallets on one side of the colonies as a windbreak. Others took straw bales that were no good for their horses because they got wet and moldy. So instead they drug them out and used them as windbreaks. There's all sorts of things that you can do if you're in a really windy area to mitigate that. Remember, wind chill is real for us and for the bees too.
So using a screen bottom board is good for the summer. Do you leave it on in the winter?
Oh yeah, screen bottom boards. Great idea. You know, we use screen bottom boards as a grow-up prevention tool. They are also good for large colonies. I run both screened and solids, and usually what I'll do is I'll make a judgment call to take off screen bottoms. And if I have fully 3 westerns packed full of bees going into the winter, screen bottom board, I don't tilt the bottom at all because screen bottom board, right? And then with that, I actually have the lid solid down because there's plenty of ventilation for condensation, that kind of stuff. Don't have to bother with any of that. Solid bottom board, typically, if it's a really monster colony on a solid bottom board, I leave it too because I don't want to take all those damn boxes off. But if it's a small colony, I'll definitely switch to a solid bottom board. Yeah, I don't know if it makes a difference, but I do it. We talked about not needing to wrap. Although paint your colonies really nicely. Make sure that they're pretty, you know, put flowers on them, so that way when you're looking at them in the wintertime, they're attractive. Go ahead.
So no one tries heating their hives, you know?
Nobody tries heating their hives, that's a bad idea. And I'll tell you why. Do not heat your hives. Do not heat your hives. Your goal is for them to consume the least amount of honey that you have made them gather over the winter time. The only way they're going to do that is if they can cluster tightly, all right, and not move around the hive as much. As soon as you add heat, they move around, they consume a lot more food. Bad idea.
Is it conceivable to do year-round honey flow in a controlled environment?
Is it conceivable to do year-round honey flow? Yeah, move to Hawaii.
No, I mean in you know, an artificial environment.
An artificial environment.
Greenhouse.
Well, greenhouse wouldn't work because bees are always looking for the sun, so that's out. But is it conceivable otherwise?
It's conceivable if you live in the tropics, of course. Yes, seriously, I'm not actually joking. I mean, I know personally beekeepers in the tropics, and they keep bees all year round, and they harvest honey every 3 weeks. It's amazing. I'm not moved there though, since I have 2 jobs here. Yeah, really, don't heating the hives, really. Seriously, I get this question more and more, and we're in an environment where you need to have your bees tightly clustered, eating as little bit of their stores as they can, not moving around. You add heat, totally takes the out of the equation. Of course, we talked about mice earlier, right? Protect your colonies against predators, basically. And mice are one of them. So if you know that you have mice in your barns and that kind of stuff, almost likely they're going to want to find a spot in your colony. So the easiest thing to do is 1/2-inch hardware cloth, and you can just bend a bee, stick it in your bottom entrance, done. That's enough to keep mice out. You know, there's other people. You know the light fixtures that have the little paracubic things? You ever remember those? Yeah, so those are 1/2-inch. You know, so if you got those lying around, just cut those up and like put them in the front. They keep the mice out. Go ahead.
We don't keep out slugs, unfortunately. That was my problem this year.
Slugs?
Slugs.
Slugs are slugs are delicious.
I got 6 slugs when I opened up the hive the other
Yeah,
week. I was disgusted.
Yeah,
And they're moldy around the sides. They thought I had a disease. I'm still...
she's lamenting about slugs, and yes. Actually, in the springtime, there's slugs. You know, I knock them off the bottom board. They're eating debris. You know, I'll even find them up on the sides where condensation has been. You know, just knock them out. And then as it warms up and the bees get more, the slugs go away. It is gross though.
Well, they went away already.
Ooh, you took care of them? All right. Do squirrels ever give bees a hard time?
Say, repeat the question.
Do squirrels ever give bees a hard time? The answer is no. Yeah, the answer is no. Let's see, so we talked about, well, actually, it's 8 o'clock, and we wanted to at least get fall management done. So why don't we stop here, and then we'll get into a little bit about winter management next time.